Before we get started, I want you to look at this picture for a few seconds. Now, you probably don't know this girl, but maybe there's something about this picture that looks familiar. Maybe it even triggers some memories, and I'm going to give you a few more seconds. And we'll come back to this picture in a little bit. Hi, my name is Jimmy Hallyburton. I'm 34 years old, and I've spent most of my life on a bicycle. When I was 25 years old, I started a nonprofit called the Boise Bicycle Project with a mission to make bicycles, bicycle repair, and bicycle education available to the entire community, regardless of income. Now, at the time, I had no nonprofit experience whatsoever. I barely even knew what a nonprofit was, but I had discovered something along my own 25-year pedal-powered journey that I needed to share, and something that I believe could transform the community that I love. And that's what I'm here to do again tonight. Share that journey, share those discoveries that I made along the way, and show us how a familiar and very specific speed might be able to connect us all a little bit in the process. In 1905, Arthur McDonald became the first person to travel 100 miles per hour in a car, which is pretty impressive for 1905, but does anybody really think that 100 miles per hour is a speed that connects us to our community? No. In 1947, Chuck Yeager became the first person to break the speed of sound, about 767 miles per hour in a plane, still not that community connecting speed that I'm looking for. But in 1986, the little kid in this picture, not my sister holding the bike, the one with the cowlick, that's me, pedaled out of my driveway for the first time and broke into the speed of discovery. Probably about 10 to 12 miles per hour, so not quite as historically significant as Chuck or the dude with the glasses, but to me, it was a big deal. And I distinctively remember pedaling out of that dirt driveway, turning onto the road, and feeling like my entire world had expanded. And maybe some of you have similar memories as a kid on a bicycle. In fact, there's a word that most people associate with that memory. The feeling, that little huffy, BMX, cruiser, banana seat, whatever it was you rode as a child, there was a feeling that bicycle gave you. Anyone know what word I'm looking for? Freedom. Oh, geez, good job. Freedom. That's the word. So let's look at this picture again. This is Fahara, a 6-year-old girl from Syria, just seconds after riding out of the door from the Boise Bicycle Project on her very first bicycle. And look at Fahara's face. You can see the world expanding in her eyes, and you can almost feel the freedom that she's experiencing. When I see this picture, it makes me smile, and it makes me feel really connected to her because I've been this kid and I've had that look. And judging by a few of your smiles in here, I think some of you have been this kid too, especially you, right there. When Fahara left our doors, she entered into a world of limitless possibilities. And on 2 wheels, moving at about 10 miles per hour, she is suddenly connected to all of them. I wish you could have seen everybody's smiles a second ago. When I left my driveway at Fahara's age, I don't think I stopped pedaling for 12 years, and I don't know if I realized it then, but my bicycle was building a deep connection between me and my community. Which was my neighborhood at the time. And I knew every nook and cranny of that neighborhood. I knew all of the shortcuts to my friend's house. I knew every single jump along the way. I knew which dogs you could stop and pet, and I knew which neighbors' dogs you had to pedal like hell to get away from. And I loved every single second of it. When I was 14 years old, I remember riding my bicycle to the Starr County Fair to see my girlfriend. Don't tell my mom. And after the fair was over, we were sitting on the swing set. My bicycle was leaning against the pole, and I grabbed her swing, pulled her closer, and we kissed for the first time. My very first kiss. And I'll never forget it. And then there was the ride home that night. There was this beautiful sunset. The wind was at my back. It definitely felt like I was going faster than 10 miles per hour. And as the wind passed by, I could taste the sensation of freedom on my lips. Strawberry chapstick, in case anybody's wondering what freedom tastes like. When I turned 16 years old, I got my driver's license, a 1981 Toyota Corolla, and I felt like my world had expanded again. But the more I spent time behind the wheel, the more dust my bicycle collected in the garage. And although I could now travel 75 miles per hour if I had that little Toyota Corolla floored, my world was beginning to change focus. And a little bit less on the community around me, and a really bit more on my own isolated circle. I realize it now, but my journey had become solely focused on the destination. There was a point A, the beginning, a point B, the end, and this big blur in between. And maybe some of you have experienced that blur before. In fact, maybe some of you experienced that blur on your way here today. What do you think your average speed was on the way here today? 20 miles per hour to 45 miles an hour, that's the speed limit. We're gonna go 5 miles over that, right? No, that's a trick question. So let's say 35 miles per hour. Here's another way of looking at that. 51 feet per second. 51 feet. And that's the blur that I'm referring to. A couple years later, I remember waking up late for college, and my car was physically stuck 2 blocks down the road. Maybe some of you experienced that too. And with no other option, I grabbed my bicycle and I started pedaling. And I'll never forget this ride, because about 2 minutes in, I was in a rush, but the world seemed to suddenly slow down. And I remember taking a deep breath, and I could feel the air reach all the way down to my toes. And I started looking around, and I started noticing houses, businesses, parks that I had never seen before. And I had traveled this road hundreds of times, but all of a sudden it was different. At one point, I passed a group of kids walking and laughing on their way to school. I remember hearing the sounds of birds in the trees, and it was like I hadn't heard it in a long time. And then I passed a horse in a pasture on the side of the road. This is Idaho. And the wind was blowing through its mane. And I reached up and I felt my own hair. It was a little longer at the time, and I wasn't wearing a helmet. I'm sorry, I know. And I had this moment with this horse where I was like, man, this horse and I really have a lot in common. And you can laugh, but at that moment, I was rediscovering my journey. All of a sudden, there was more to my path than a beginning and an end. There was an entire community, thousands of points in between, and I had been missing most of them. You see, in my car, my world had expanded in distance, but not in depth. But back on 2 wheels, at about 10 miles per hour, I broke back into the speed of discovery, and my connection with the community began to grow. And every inch that I traveled, it felt like I was falling in love. And when that love could no longer be contained, I started the Boise Bicycle Project. And when hundreds of people began to show up to get their hands dirty, I realized this journey I'd been going on, this life-changing discovery that I thought I had made, wasn't my own. No, this was something that had transformed and was transforming the lives of countless others all across the country. And this was 2007. So financially, things for a lot of folks were not going very good. But all of a sudden, there was a huge spike in the amount of people riding bicycles. And maybe it was because of lack of funds, but those numbers have not gone down yet today. And I think that what people were discovering as they got on their bikes was something just as valuable, and something that I believe that we're all looking for in this room today: a need and a desire for connection. I've been working at the Boise Bicycle Project for about 10 years now, and I've been part of a team that has fixed and distributed over 12,000 bicycles back onto the streets of Boise, including 5,000 bicycles to kids who maybe never would have had their own bicycle or the feeling of freedom and opportunity that come with it. And that... Thank you. And that makes me feel really proud, and it makes me feel really lucky. One of the luckiest things I get to do is work with the refugee community. And these are people, families, from all over the world who have seen and experienced things that I can't possibly imagine. But when you put them on a bicycle, the look in their eyes, the smile on their face, it's the same as mine, the same as yours, the same as this little boy from Sudan, and the same as Fahara, the little girl from earlier. And that makes me wonder, what is it about riding a bicycle that connects us in such an interesting way? Connects us to our community and even connects us to a family on the other side of the world. Gandhi once said that there is more to life than increasing its speed. And I would actually add there's more to life when you start decreasing its speed. And that's the speed of discovery I've been talking about this entire time, that 10 to 12 miles per hour average speed of a bicycle that not only allows us to observe the world around us, but to interact and engage with everything and everyone between point A and point B. The other day I was driving my truck. I still drive sometimes. And there was a homeless person standing on the corner with a sign. And to be honest with you, I don't even know what that sign said because I started having this ridiculous dialogue going on in my head. Should I make eye contact? Should I not make eye contact? Should I say something? Maybe I'll make just a little bit of eye contact, but act like I'm really focused on my driving. Maybe even so focused that by the time I pass him, he will be impressed with how focused I was on my driving. This ridiculous conversation going on in my head, and I knew it was ridiculous because a week earlier, I had been at that same intersection with that same homeless person. He might have even been holding the same sign, only this time I was on my bicycle. And you know what I did? I said, "Hey, how's it going?" Without even thinking about it. When we're not separated by the shell or a bubble or the speeds that come with a car, our journey suddenly becomes a very human experience, and our interactions become a little more real and a little less ridiculous. And maybe a lot less ridiculous if you're talking about me in that conversation. By the way, this is Gandhi on a bicycle. Yeah. So a few months ago, I rode my bicycle down to the Women's March, and I was surrounded by 6,000 passionate women and men, and it was snowing hard that day, wet snow. And everybody was cold and drenched, but there was this incredible energy going on in the air. And at the end of the march, I had made a sign, and it was looking pretty rough. So I rolled it up, stuffed it into my bike basket, and I started pedaling home. I got to an intersection, and this minivan pulled up next to me. And I could tell that the passenger was staring at me. And so I looked over, and it was an older man with Down syndrome. And he's looking back and forth between me and the sign on my bicycle. And so I smiled and I waved and I looked forward again. And all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I could see him waving frantically. And I looked back and he was pointing down at the sign in my basket. And then he reached down and he held up a sign of his own. It said, "I march for equality." I gave him a big thumbs up. He gave me an even bigger thumbs up, and then they drove away, and I almost lost it. It was an emotional day already, but on the corner of Main and Broadway, I started to break down because I could not comprehend the interaction that had just taken place. It was very quick. It was very simple, but I have never felt so lucky to be cold and wet and vulnerable and completely accessible on my bicycle. I'm not against driving. I told you already I still drive sometimes, but most of the time I choose to ride. I know that when I ride, it brings me closer to you, closer to the community that I love, and closer to all of the kids that I've helped donate bicycles to over the years. And I know this because there is a phenomenon in bicycling called safety in numbers. It means the simple act of riding, just one extra person on the road creates awareness for every driver that sees them. And that makes it safer for everybody who might be riding that day and even the next. And I think that that's magical. How riding our bicycles not only connect us to our community, but help us build a stronger and safer community for everyone else in the process. And if we wanted to take that a little bit further, it means that when you or I ride, we're making it safer for the 5,000 kids who might be riding to school on Boise Bicycle Project bicycles. And each of those kids are making it safer for us. And I think that that's an amazing connection to have. I want to leave you with one last story, and this time it's not my own. In order to get a bicycle from the Boise Bicycle Project, every kid has to draw a picture or write a story about their dream bicycle. They give us their height, their age, their 2 favorite colors, and then we use this information to create the perfect bike for them. When we give these bikes to the kids, they always say, "This is exactly like the picture that I drew." And bicycles are pretty hard to draw, so that's not always true. But we sure do our best. This is Andrew McCormick's drawing from a couple of years ago, and a really good one. And he also gave us a story. "I would like to have a bike to ride. I do not have one to ride. My cousin has a bike to ride and can go everywhere, but I cannot go with him because I do not have one. My Nana is raising me and doing all she can, but she do not have money for a bike. I have coins I have saved and will give them to help. All of my friends have bikes and I cannot go and feel sad. I would be so happy to have a bike. I do not care about color. I would be thankful just to have one. That is all I want for Christmas. Andrew McCormick. So this is Andrew, and this is the dream bicycle that he drew. And you are damn right that I got my picture taken with him before he rode away with bright eyes, a big smile at about 10 miles per hour. And what does that mean for us here tonight? Me, you, the people who might be watching or listening. It means tomorrow morning we're going to wake up and our day will be full of choices and opportunities to slow things down. And maybe you'll reach for your car door and decide to ride your bicycle instead. And that's actually what I want to challenge everyone here to do tonight. Just one time next week, look at the weather forecast, choose the nicest day of the week, and go for a ride. Doesn't matter what kind of clothing you're wearing, what sort of bicycle you have, and if the distance is too far, stick your bicycle in your trunk, drive halfway, and start pedaling. A couple of minutes in, I want you to take a deep breath, and I want you to think about Andrew and his dream bike. I want you to think about Fahara pedaling her bicycle to school, and I want you to think about the freedom that your bicycle gave you as a child. Now look, listen, and feel the world around you. At this point, you will have broken back into the speed of discovery. You'll be connected to all of those people, and you'll be connected to a beautiful community in between. Thank you for riding on this journey with me tonight.